Hello, I chose for my research summary this week from this module 4 to be what is actually not a research study, but a review of many other research studies. So it was a lot to dig through, but once I got my head around it, really beneficial, really helpful to see the scope of research and understanding of this particular topic, which is the title of this review was Classroom Management, a critical part of educational psychology with implications for teacher education. So primarily just discussing what should we attempt to teach pre-service teachers and novice teachers regarding classroom management. How can educational psychology contribute to that equipping of new and pre-service teachers with the skills they need, particularly in regard to classroom management? So, there we go. Basically the purpose of the study was to review the research on classroom management. And as I mentioned, to focus on pre-service teachers training and how they could be better equipped for classroom management. They looked at a lot of different various sources of research that came at this classroom management topic from different angles, including the ecological psychology perspective in Kunin, like what environmental conditions affect student behavior, and thus what can we do to adapt the environment to promote better classroom behavior, positive behaviors, conducive to learning and engagement, classroom seating, transition management, effective teachers minimize the time on transitions, process outcome research and its perspective on this topic, the affective features of management as far as teacher expertise and cognition, and that interactive thinking on your feet, interactive decision making, and classroom management and inclusion, and how that impacts classroom management as far as including all students with special needs and everyone else in between in your classroom instruction, and addressing their needs especially when you're doing whole class instruction. And then also looked at cooperative learning activities and how you have to kind of switch gears when you're teaching groups or having students work in groups, I should say, because then you're teaching more I'll get into it, but essentially these are the different things that looked at. So a wide spectrum. But at the end of the day, and throughout the research, one key thought was that good management is preventive rather than reactive, responding proactively to student behaviors or conditions that could elicit particular student behaviors, rather than waiting for those behaviors to happen and reacting to them. That was a primary difference they saw with novice when compared to more experienced teachers. So good management is preventive rather than reactive. I want to make sure I include my notes here. And along those same lines, in regard to proactively responding to student behavior, one way they do that is that experienced teachers were observed to have identified and taught those desirable behaviors to students, not just expecting those behaviors, but making those expected behaviors known and clear, and teaching them how to behave well, not just assuming that they would possess the skills to be able to do so. Come on, PowerPoint. There we go. So to dig into those subcategories a bit, or those perspectives, different approaches, I should say, to this topic from different research perspectives or philosophical stances, aspects of lessons that contributed to on-task behaviors and less misbehavior, less misbehavior were, when you look at process outcome research, identifies that we've seen in our text are aligned with what I found in this research review: the with-itness, eyes in the back of your head, smoothness of delivery, instruction, momentum, keeping the pace, not dragging, overlapping, group alerting, just ways to get the group's attention quickly and effectively throughout instruction, and to target to indicate transitions, things like that. Teacher behaviors that affected student achievement. So this was more on the affective perspective, I should say, that affected student achievement, monitoring student behavior constantly. They made their expectations clear to minimize disruptions. They kept students focused. Less time was spent on transitions. So the different research that came at this topic from different perspectives or philosophical stances or whatever came essentially to the same conclusion, that this is what expert teachers do and experienced teachers do, teachers that have strong classroom management skills. These are behaviors that you can see are closely related or if not identical things that different research identified. Again, teacher expertise. Much of the research that was reviewed in this found that actions and the reflections of experienced teachers, they like to compare. There was one piece in particular, specific piece of research that specifically compared teachers and novices, but there were other parts of research that was in this review that also spoke to that comparison between what they saw more experienced expert teachers doing. And they noticed they have a pedagogical knowledge of classroom management. It's instinctive to them at some point. They've done it so long or they've done it so well and effectively. Flexibility. Expert teachers were less jarred by unexpected things. They made plans and expected to stick with those plans, but they weren't thrown off course when unexpected assemblies or student behaviors or anything in between occurred. A fire drill right in the middle of your whatever, they were able to continue to make instructional changes in response to those changing factors. And changing factors is a huge category, as any of us who have been in the classroom for any amount of time know, between student behavior, just things going on in the school, weather, all those sorts of things. Again, experienced teachers, they took measures to avoid proactively behavior and management issues. They anticipated potential student issues, whether it was from the different research perspectives, whether it came from, environmental issues, the flow of the classroom as far as where the desks were placed, just all the different things that could influence student behavior. They were anticipated those. Experienced teachers did it and proactively responded, which resulted, of course, in less negative behavioral issues. And they saw that in general, novices, so those are all in regard to experienced teachers, but novices or new pre-service teachers in particular are more reactive. Also, when you look at the inclusion, I mentioned when you have to include students with special needs, teachers felt a lack of ability or knowledge in how to adapt whole class instruction to include the needs of all their students. They might rank themselves very high in whole class instruction skills or in, behavioral management skills and expertise. But in particular, in one research study, there were multiple that discussed this, but in this review, but one mentioned that, when they rated themselves very low, however, when teachers rated themselves on their ability to meet the needs of special needs students or students with special needs in their classes. So that's something that was pointed out as a need as much as it was an observation for all teachers. Experience included to gain greater skill and efficacy in. And then cooperative learning activities present unique management challenges. To ensure those groups work effectively, individual expectations, responsibilities were outlined, the group dynamic, behaviors were taught and expected. It requires instruction in those behaviors necessary for that group to successfully interact and learn. For the group cooperative learning activity to actually be a learning activity. So what else do we have here? So the results, I could probably go on and on and on about the results that I found, were able to pull that could apply to my own practice in the future in the classroom, as well as the specifically stated results that the authors themselves stated. So I'll just review some of these, but I would encourage you to read this article yourself, this research review yourself, just to glean what you can from it as well. But essentially, good classroom management is viewed as a condition for student learning by allowing teachers to accomplish other important instructional goals. So it's important that educational psychology contribute to the field of teacher education, pre-service teacher education, as well as novice support and instruction and education, helping us newbies to develop effective classroom management skills, because that will set the scene, and that will allow us to be that much more effective teachers and actually meet our instructional goals when we're not dealing with behavioral issues all day. So one of the results that they found was that they found that even experienced teachers had sympathy for students who were struggling academically, but they felt more anger and frustration with behavioral issues, feeling that students could have taken control, or students were responsible for their behavioral issues, but they weren't maybe so responsible, or it wasn't their fault, perhaps, with their academic deficiencies. So they had more sympathy for that. They didn't get as angry with students if they didn't perform academically as they did behaviorally, which I think points out that there is a need to, this is my generalized, I extrapolated from that, it wasn't specifically stated in this review, that teachers, we have to develop our understanding of how to respond to behaviors and target academic deficiencies with a growth mindset. We don't want to see progress as deemed impossible. We need to see it as deemed possible and not a fixed thing. We also need to see that behaviors are as much influenced by a range of external factors at home and at school, just different things that can cause students to have behavioral struggles, some of which aren't quote unquote their fault. It could be a chemical imbalance, or a cognitive issue that's going on, can cause those behavioral issues just as much as the academic deficiencies. So we should have sympathy and empathy for our students in both regards, and that can help, I believe, with our anger and frustration when we do experience any or all of the above. The specifically stated, however, in the results, and what I pulled out of it, was that teachers need to be able to think on their feet, remain flexible in an ever-changing environment, and the growth in this ability can be supported by the work of educational psychologists. We can incorporate relevant classroom management content into pre-service teacher education. Every teacher, we can, across the spectrum of teacher education courses, all faculty at the higher ed can incorporate classroom management strategies and education and information in their courses. So whether, regardless of whether we're taking, a special needs course, or what are all the courses we're taking, a reading strategies course, an instruction in math course, all these different courses can incorporate and include classroom management strategies specific to that content area, for example, and that would be beneficial to pre-service and novice teachers. We need to support teachers' understanding of what constitutes effective management through research and reflecting on what does and does not work. Educational psychology can contribute to that greatly, and to identify specific factors, including teaching behaviors and dispositions and context that function as, quote, managerial features. Consider your context in which you're teaching, your dispositions, behaviors. It's all a part. Look at all those different factors and how they contribute to successful classroom management. Additional implications and applications, looking at teacher testing and evaluation, and giving them feedback. Professional development in this area of classroom management, school reform in general, not just individual teachers, but the school culture in general, can benefit from the research that's available to us through educational psychology researchers. And public perception of school systems can be an area in which educational psych can inform the public as well, and gain greater allies and support as we seek to help students. In closing, I quoted this from the authors of this research review. When short-term, simplistic, or reactive approaches, which we know all of those are not effective, when these approaches are proposed by policymakers or administrators, we can recommend strategies, those of us who are informed by the work of educational psychologists, and we can recommend strategies that are preventive, comprehensive, holistic, I add, and sensitive to the realities of the classroom. So again, really, I gained a great deal from this research, and I would encourage you to read it as well. It's a great jumping off place too, as they suggest additional areas of needed research in our own action research in the future, perhaps. So there you go.